No one warns you about this part. They teach you how to deal with enemies. They tell you to watch out for strangers. They give you rules, stories, and survival lessons for handling the outside world. But they never tell you that the deepest pain often comes from the people you love. That it's not the enemy who leaves the longest scars. It's the friend who once said, "I'll always be there." It's the sibling who shared your childhood memories but not your grief. It's the parent who fed you, clothed you, raised you, and still left parts of your heart starving. It's the partner who once held you in silence, but couldn't hold you through the storm. You expect betrayal from outside, but when the damage comes from the inside, it leaves you speechless, because there's no script for that kind of heartbreak. There's no handbook for what to do when the ones you trusted the most quietly step back when you need them the most. And it doesn't happen all at once. It starts in small ways. A phone call not returned, a promise delayed, a laugh that doesn't reach their eyes anymore. You tell yourself it's nothing. They're just busy, just distracted, just tired. But inside something breaks, because part of you knows they're already gone. And here's where the real hurt begins. Not from what they did, but from what you expected them to do. That's what no one tells you growing up, that the real wound is expectation. You expected your friend to care the way you did. You expected your family to show up when the world fell apart. You expected anyone to notice you weren't okay. But they didn't, and that silence is louder than any argument. That absence is heavier than any rejection. Because you didn't just lose people, you lost the story you were telling yourself. The story that love is forever, that blood means loyalty, that kindness will be repaid, that presence means commitment. You were living inside a dream society gave you. A dream filled with lines like family comes first. True friends never leave. Love always finds a way. But Schopenhauer, he didn't buy into that fantasy. He said something few have the courage to say out loud. Human beings are not cruel by nature. They are selfish, not out of malice, but out of instinct. Let that settle in. People don't hurt you because they're evil. They hurt you because your pain doesn't affect their survival. Because their world keeps spinning even when yours stops. And the more you expect them to love you the way you love them, the more invisible you become in their eyes. It's a truth that hits you late in life, often after the damage is already done. You wrote a contract in your heart they never agreed to. You believed, I was there for them so they'll be there for me. But they didn't sign that deal. You were hoping, you were giving. You were holding space for them. But they weren't holding it for you. And when you realize that, truly realize it, it knocks the wind out of you. Because now you're not just grieving their absence. You're grieving your own naivety. You're grieving the part of yourself that believed in fairness, in emotional balance, in the idea that love means something universal. But what if it doesn't? What if to some people, love is only real when it serves them? What if presence is only loyalty until it becomes inconvenient? What if kindness is only remembered while it's still useful? That's what Schopenhauer saw. Not a world full of villains, just a world full of people trying to protect themselves first. And when that protection comes at the cost of you, they don't flinch, they don't pause, they don't even notice. And yet you still wonder, what did I do wrong? But maybe the answer isn't in what you did. Maybe it's in what you expected. You expected to be prioritized. You expected to be seen. You expected the love you gave to be mirrored back. But the mirror was always one way. And that's why you feel broken. But here's the shift. When you stop expecting everyone to hold you, you learn how to hold yourself. You stop waiting for the apology. You stop replaying conversations. You stop asking, why wasn't I enough? And you start remembering, you were always enough. They just weren't capable. And that's not on you. That's just the nature of people. That's just the world Schopenhauer saw. One without guarantees. One where the most painful betrayal comes not from strangers, but from the silence of those you once called home. But once you stop expecting, you stop breaking. And when you stop breaking, you start building something new. Not a shield, not a wall, but a self that no longer needs to be rescued. A self that finally learns, the person you were waiting for, was always you. You were raised inside a story, a beautiful one, a comforting one, but also, a lie. They told you that family is sacred, that your siblings are your first friends, that your parents will love you more than anyone ever will. That friendship, real friendship, is unbreakable. That if you give love, you'll receive it. That if you're loyal, people will be loyal back. that if you're kind, life will reward you for it. And for a while you believe it. Why wouldn't you? It's repeated in every movie, whispered in every lullaby, echoed in every cultural tradition. Blood is thicker than water. A true friend is closer than a brother. Love conquers all. But no one tells you what happens when that illusion breaks. No one prepares you for the day your own family becomes strangers. For the moment your closest friend becomes someone who scrolls past your pain. For the silence after you give your heart to someone, and they walk away without a second glance. You sit there, confused, not just hurt, but disoriented. Because the rules they taught you don't match reality. You did everything right. You loved deeply. You gave without keeping score. You stood beside them when they had nothing. You celebrated them when they had everything. And still, they disappeared. Still, they forgot. Still, they chose distance over understanding. So you blame yourself. You think maybe you're the one who's flawed. Maybe you expect too much. Maybe you're too emotional, too intense, too soft. But here's what Schopenhauer knew, long before modern psychology ever gave it a name. We're not hurting because people are cruel. We're hurting because we were raised on fantasy. A fantasy that told us love is always returned. That family always protects. That friends always stay. That if you just give enough, care enough, try enough, you'll be safe. But the world doesn't work like that. Because the world is not built on fairness. It's built on instincts, on survival, on quiet self-interest. Schopenhauer didn't say this to make us bitter. He said it so we could stop waiting to be saved by people who are just trying to save themselves. He wasn't cynical, he was clear. He said that most human beings aren't driven by cruelty. They're driven by need, by what benefits them, by what gives them warmth in a cold world. And when your warmth no longer benefits them, they move on, not because they're heartless, but because your pain is no longer their priority. It's not evil, it's just nature. So here's where the real pain lives. It lives in the gap between what we were told to believe, and what we see with our own eyes. We were told family will always understand, but sometimes, your family becomes the first to judge you. We were told friends are forever, but sometimes, they disappear the moment life stops being convenient. We were told love is a mutual exchange, but sometimes, you love someone who only ever saw you as a temporary shelter. And that truth, it shakes you, it breaks something inside you, not because it's cruel, but because it's unfamiliar. You weren't trained for this. You weren't prepared to unlearn everything you believed about connection. But now, you must. You must learn that loyalty doesn't always come from blood. That care doesn't always come from history. That presence doesn't always mean emotional safety. You must learn to separate what you were taught from what is true, because clinging to the fantasy will only keep you stuck in patterns that hurt. Waiting for your family to change, waiting for your friend to finally get it, waiting for that person to come back and love you the way you imagined. But what if they never do? What if the person they were is all they'll ever be? Can you accept that? Can you release the dream? Because if you can, then you finally begin to heal. You start to see love not as a promise, but as a moment. Not as a guarantee, but as a gift. You stop measuring people by what they should have done, and start observing what they actually do. You stop holding on to memories as proof of loyalty. You stop using the past as a reason to tolerate the present. And most importantly, you stop expecting people to be characters in the story you were told. Instead, you write a new story. One where love is chosen, not owed. One where connection is earned, not assumed. One where peace isn't found in people, but in truth. And in that truth, Schopenhauer offers a gift. Not a warm one, not a sweet one, but a necessary one. The freedom to stop pretending. The freedom to stop pretending. The freedom to stop pretending that everyone who says I love you knows what love really means. The freedom to stop pretending that loyalty is guaranteed just because you share blood or history or time. The freedom to stop pretending that others owe you the same heart you gave them. Because the moment you stop pretending, you start living, not in the dream, but in reality. And reality, no matter how sharp, will always hurt less than the fantasy that kept breaking your heart. Pain doesn't begin when people leave. It begins the moment you start expecting them to stay. It's not the goodbye that breaks you. It's the belief that there would never be one. The betrayal didn't happen when they turned their back. It happened much earlier, when you believed they never would. Because expectations, quietly, and without warning, create the conditions for heartbreak. They write invisible contracts, unspoken rules, silent hopes that live inside your chest, like promises you never actually heard out loud. I was there for them, so they'll be there for me. I showed up, so they'll show up. I stayed so they won't walk away. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You wrote those expectations without asking the other person if they agreed. You imagined reciprocity, but they never signed the deal. You thought love was a circle. You thought loyalty was a mirror. You thought what you gave would come back in kind. But what if it doesn't? What if they never saw the world the way you do? What if their idea of friendship was always conditional? What if their love was never built to hold your pain? What if their loyalty had an expiration date, and you were just too hopeful to see it? This is where Schopenhauer draws the line between suffering and illusion. He says suffering isn't just pain, it's pain born from desire. We desire people to care. We desire them to notice, to check in, to understand, to carry part of our emotional weight, and when they don't, we break. But not because they failed us, because they failed to live up to the version of them we created in our minds. It's not just the relationship that shatters, it's the fantasy. That's why it hurts so much. You didn't just lose someone, you lost who you believed they were. You lost the comfort of thinking they'd never let you fall. You lost the safety of the story you were holding on to, and suddenly, everything feels unstable. Not just your connection to them, but your connection to the world. You begin to ask dangerous questions. Can I really trust anyone? Was I just useful to them? Did they love me, or just what I did for them? And then comes the silence, the kind that echoes in your mind, the kind where no one texts first, the kind where you realize you were always the glue. And now that you've stopped holding things together, everything is falling apart. It's a brutal revelation. Most people don't stay because of love. They stay because of benefit. Your kindness was convenient. Your presence was comfortable. Your loyalty was expected. Until it wasn't. Until you asked for the same in return. Until you needed them the way they had always needed you. That's when things shifted. Suddenly, they had less time, less interest, less compassion. And now you're left wondering, did they ever really care? But maybe that's not the question. Maybe the better question is, why did I expect them to? Expectation is the thief of peace. It convinces you that people owe you things they never agreed to give. It turns your love into a transaction, your care into a currency, your presence into a debt they're supposed to repay. But they won't. And that doesn't make them evil. It makes them human. People don't always love you the way you love them. They don't always think the way you think. They don't always value what you value. And if you don't learn to accept that, you'll keep bleeding from wounds they don't even know they caused. So what's the solution? It's not closing your heart. It's not becoming cynical. It's not pretending you don't care. It's reducing your expectations, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You stop expecting them to show up. You stop expecting them to respond like you would. You stop expecting the world to echo your effort. And suddenly, you feel lighter. Because now when someone loves you, it's a gift, not a right. When someone shows up, it's a miracle, not a transaction. When someone stays, it's a choice, not an obligation. Schopenhauer wasn't telling us to stop loving. He was telling us to love smarter, to love without leaning, to give without needing, to show up without keeping score. Because when you remove expectation, you remove the sting of disappointment. And in that space, you find something else, something softer, something calmer, something that feels like peace, the kind that no one can take away from you, because it no longer depends on them. There's an old parable Schopenhauer used to describe human relationships. It's not romantic, it's not poetic, but it's honest. It's called the hedgehog dilemma. Imagine two hedgehogs in winter. It's freezing, they're cold, shivering, desperate for warmth. The only way to survive is to get close to one another. So they do. They move toward each other, inch by inch, seeking comfort and closeness. But there's a problem. They're covered in spines, and the closer they get, the more they hurt each other. They poke, they bleed, they recoil. So they separate, they back away. But then the cold returns, and they have to choose again. Be alone and freeze, or get close and hurt. Sound familiar? Because that is how human relationships work. We want connection. We want love. We want to be seen, understood, held, needed. But the closer we get to someone, the more exposed we become. They see our flaws. We see theirs. We bump into each other's wounds. We clash over beliefs, needs, silences, expectations, and suddenly, the thing that once felt warm starts to sting. So we pull away, we protect ourselves, we go cold again. But loneliness is its own kind of pain, so we try again. Another friend, another partner, another attempt at closeness, and the cycle repeats. This is the hedgehog dilemma. Get too close, and you hurt. Stay too far, and you freeze. So what's the answer? Is it to stay distant forever? To never love again? To walk alone just to avoid the sting? No, that's not what Schopenhauer believed. The answer isn't in removing love, it's in redefining distance. We're taught that real love is all-consuming, that closeness means constant contact, that true intimacy means merging souls, erasing boundaries, living for each other. But maybe that's why we keep getting hurt, because we confuse closeness with ownership, we confuse love with dependency, we confuse connection with control. But real love, it needs space to breathe. You don't have to be fused at the hip to be close. You don't have to answer every text to be loyal. You don't have to solve every crisis to be supportive. Sometimes, love means giving space. Sometimes, it means stepping back. Sometimes, it means learning to love from the right distance. The kind of distance where you can still reach each other, but not destroy each other. Where you can still feel warmth, but not bleed every time you touch. It's not easy, because distance feels unfamiliar. It feels like detachment. It feels like something's wrong. But in truth, distance is wisdom. It's the understanding that closeness is not about proximity, but about presence. You can be in the same room as someone, and feel 1,000 miles away. You can be halfway across the world, and still feel deeply connected. It's not about constant contact. It's about conscious contact. And once you realize that, you stop overgiving. You stop over-explaining. You stop pressing yourself against people, hoping they'll fill the spaces inside you. Because you finally understand, their job isn't to fix your loneliness. Their job isn't to validate your worth. Their job isn't to warm your cold world. That's yours. The people who stay with you, despite the space, despite the quiet, despite the distance, those are your people, not because they cling to you, but because they respect your edges. They know your wounds, and they don't poke them. They know your silence, and they don't fear it. They know your rhythm, and they walk beside it, not ahead of it, not behind it. They don't try to own you. They meet you where you are. That's what Schopenhauer meant when he said we must find the right distance. Not too close to destroy each other, not too far to lose each other, but just close enough to love freely, without pain. So maybe the goal isn't endless warmth. Maybe the goal is comfort within boundaries. Maybe the strongest relationships aren't built on constant closeness, but on quiet understanding. Because sometimes, the most powerful kind of love is the kind that knows when to step back. There is a strange kind of peace that enters your life the moment you stop expecting people to be anything more than they are.
It doesn't arrive with celebration. No fireworks, no applause, just a quiet shift, like a weight sliding off your shoulders. For the first time, you stop checking your phone to see if they replied. You stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen. You stop writing mental letters to people who walked away without reading the first one. You stop needing, and that is when everything changes. Because as long as you are waiting, you are suffering, waiting for them to understand, waiting for them to show up, waiting for them to love you in the way you've imagined. And all that waiting is a cage. Schopenhauer understood this. He knew that it wasn't other people who trap us, it's our expectations of them. It's the fantasy we hold on to, even when reality has already knocked it down. You keep loving someone who's no longer present. You keep giving energy to a connection that's already dissolved. You keep telling yourself that if you hold on just a little longer, they'll come around, but they don't. And it's not because you weren't worthy, it's because they were never capable, or willing, or honest. And the longer you expect them to change, the longer you postpone your peace. Here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. The people who hurt you are not coming back to heal you. They're not going to suddenly understand your pain. They're not going to one day wake up and feel everything you felt, because they didn't feel it then, and they won't feel it now. So why are you still waiting? You say you want peace, but you're still standing at the door of someone who locked it long ago. You say you want closure, but you're still digging through memories, trying to find proof that it was real. You say you're done, but your heart is still writing a new ending for a chapter that already closed. But what if you didn't need their apology? What if you didn't need their explanation? What if you didn't need anything at all? Because here's what happens when you stop expecting, you start living. You reclaim the energy you gave away. You pull back the pieces of yourself that scattered across all the rooms you waited in. You breathe without asking permission. You no longer need a response to feel valid. You no longer need a reply to feel loved. You no longer need someone to stay in order to feel whole. Because wholeness was never supposed to come from someone else. It was supposed to come from you. You don't need their words to confirm your worth. You don't need their presence to know you matter. You don't need their loyalty to trust your own heart. Schopenhauer wasn't telling us to give up on love. He was telling us to stop handing our peace to people who haven't earned it. He was saying if expectation is the source of your pain, let go of it. Not to become cold, but to become free. When you stop expecting, you become harder to disappoint. Not because you've lowered your standards, but because you've stopped tying your happiness to someone else's behavior. You begin to love differently. You love quietly, without clinging. You give without tracking. You care without performing. And if someone loves you back, that's beautiful. But if they don't, you don't collapse. Because your love was never a contract. It was a reflection of who you are. When you stop expecting, you don't lose connection. You find clarity. You start seeing who's really showing up. You stop making excuses for people who only offer half their heart. You stop tolerating relationships built on your effort alone. And most importantly, you stop betraying yourself just to keep others comfortable. You choose yourself, not in bitterness, but in peace. Not in pride, but in understanding. Because you finally see the truth. You don't need people to stay. You need to stop waiting for them. That's the peace that grows in the silence. That's the strength that blooms in solitude. That's the freedom that Schopenhauer was pointing to all along. The kind that comes not when everyone loves you, but when you stop needing them to. Some of the hardest people to walk away from are not your enemies, not your ex, not even the friend who let you down. The hardest ones to walk away from are your family. Because they didn't just share time with you. They shared your beginning. They were there when your story first started. They were the backdrop to your earliest memories, your childhood, your definition of home. And yet sometimes, they hurt you the most. Not always with words, not always with violence, but with silence, with absence, with judgments disguised as concern, with expectations that suffocate more than they support. And still, you stay. You stay because you feel like you have to. Because you were taught that leaving them would make you ungrateful, disloyal, heartless. You tell yourself, but they're my blood. They raised me. They gave me food, shelter, life. So you repay them, not with love but with emotional submission. You hide your truth to keep the peace. You tolerate the disrespect to avoid the guilt. You shrink yourself to stay accepted, even when that acceptance feels more like quiet disapproval. But here's the truth, Schopenhauer would want you to face, blood is not a reason to suffer. You owe kindness, yes. You owe gratitude, perhaps. But you do not owe your life. You do not owe your mental health. You do not owe your silence, just because someone shares your DNA. Family is supposed to be a foundation, not a prison. And if the people who gave you life now drain it from you, that's not tradition. That's emotional captivity. We don't talk about this enough. Because society romanticizes family. We're told to be patient, to forgive, to keep it together, because they're all you have. But what if the people who were supposed to protect you are the ones you now need protection from? What if keeping it together is what's tearing you apart? You see, there's a kind of emotional guilt that no one warns you about, the kind rooted in history. You stay not because it's right, but because you feel indebted. They were there for me when I was sick. They paid my school fees. They sacrificed so much. So now you give back, not in love, but in quiet self-abandonment. You let their opinions override your truth. You let their anger silence your voice. You let their expectations chain your freedom. But that's not love. That's an emotional debt disguised as duty. And here's the harsh reality. If love comes with a price, it's not love. It's a transaction. True love doesn't require you to lose yourself. True love doesn't weaponize your past. True love doesn't demand that you bleed just to keep the bond intact. Schopenhauer saw this clearly. He understood that most suffering in relationships comes from what we're afraid to confront. And when it comes to family, we're afraid to say the truth out loud. This connection hurts me, because the moment you say it, everything shifts. People look at you differently. They question your loyalty. They say you're selfish, cold, dramatic. But the truth is, protecting your peace is not selfish, it's survival. Because what good is a family that knows how to celebrate your successes, but dismisses your pain? What good is a tradition that forces you to smile at the same table that once silenced your tears? You don't have to cut them off. You don't have to start a war, but you are allowed to set boundaries. Even with the people who raised you, you're allowed to take space, to say no when it hurts, to pull back when the emotional cost becomes too high. Because guilt is not love, and tolerance is not healing. It is not your job to carry a legacy of emotional dysfunction, just because it came wrapped in family ties. And if anyone tells you that you owe your life to those who gave you life, tell them this: I honor what they gave me, but I will not betray myself to repay them. Because the greatest gift you can give, to yourself and even to them, is your truth. The truth that says I love you but I cannot keep shrinking for you. I appreciate you but I need distance to heal. I will always care, but I must care for myself first. That's not rebellion. That's maturity. That's not disrespect. That's self-preservation. And that is what Schopenhauer meant when he said that peace begins where illusion ends. There's something we rarely say out loud, but almost all of us feel it. I gave so much. Why didn't they give back? That question lives quietly inside our heartbreak. It's not the loud kind of pain. It's the silent kind. The disappointment that creeps in when your effort is not matched, when your kindness goes unnoticed, when your love doesn't return home. You tell yourself that love is a circle, that if you offer loyalty, you'll receive it, that if you're there for someone when they need you, they'll be there for you when you fall. But reality doesn't always work that way. Sometimes, the people you hold up never reach back to catch you. Sometimes, the people you check on never think to ask how you are. Sometimes, the ones who lean on you disappear when you need a shoulder. And what hurts most is not their absence. It's the belief that they wouldn't be. You keep telling yourself that what you gave meant something, that your love had value, that your presence had weight, that surely at the very least, they noticed. But what if they didn't? What if they saw your giving, not as generosity, but as normal? What if your loyalty became expectation? What if your consistency became invisible? Schopenhauer understood this well. He believed that most of our emotional suffering doesn't come from cruelty, it comes from illusion. The illusion that love is a transaction, that effort guarantees return, that people are mirrors, and if you smile, they'll smile back. If you give, they'll give back. If you love, they'll love back. But here's the truth. Most people don't love the way you do. Not because they're wrong, not because you're right, but because people give only what they're capable of giving. They see relationships through their own needs, their own filters, their own wounds. And sometimes, that means they take more than they give. Sometimes, they drain without noticing. Sometimes, they stay while it's easy, and vanish the moment it gets real. And the hardest part, you keep justifying it. You keep saying maybe they're just busy. Maybe they're going through something. Maybe they'll come around. But deep down you feel it.
You know what it's like to carry a friendship on your back, to carry the emotional labor in a relationship while the other person coasts, to be the one who always texts first, always initiates, always gives more than you get, and yet you stay. Because letting go feels like giving up. Because if you admit that they never gave as much as you did, you'd have to admit that your love wasn't enough to make them stay. But Schopenhauer didn't ask us to stop loving. He asked us to stop needing love to be fair. Because fairness is an expectation, and expectations are the birthplace of all emotional pain. So what if you gave because it was who you are, not because you expected anything back? What if you loved without waiting for it to be returned? What if your loyalty wasn't a contract, but a reflection of your own soul? Would it still hurt when they didn't reciprocate? Yes, but it wouldn't break you, because you'd stop measuring your worth by their reaction. You'd stop tying your peace to their behavior. You'd start seeing your love as a gift, not an investment. And when you shift like that, everything changes. You stop chasing, you stop begging, you stop overthinking every message, every silence, every moment they didn't show up. Because now, your giving has boundaries, your love has clarity, your effort has balance. You can still love deeply, but you no longer lose yourself in that love. You can still be there for others, but not at the cost of your own well-being. You can still hope, but not hinge your happiness
happiness on their response. Because emotional reciprocity is rare, and depending on it is dangerous. So you start choosing differently. You stop giving endlessly to people who only take. You stop romanticizing one-sided relationships. You stop believing that your love will fix someone who doesn't even want to be whole. And in that space, the space after illusion dies, you begin to feel something you may not have felt in a long time. Freedom. The freedom to give without being emptied. The freedom to care without being controlled. The freedom to walk away, not in anger, but in peace. Because now, you no longer need anyone to give back what you gave. You gave it because it was real, and that's enough. Something strange happens when you stop expecting other people to rescue you. At first it feels like abandonment, like you've been left behind in a world full of closed doors and cold shoulders. You look around, hoping someone will turn back, someone will notice, someone will care, but no one does. And in that moment, you think you've been forgotten. But what if you haven't? What if you've just been redirected? What if the silence you now hear is not rejection but invitation? An invitation to turn inward, to sit with yourself, to stop knocking on the doors of people who were never meant to shelter your soul. You see, we spend so much of our lives orbiting other people, trying to be needed, trying to be liked, trying to prove we are worth staying for. We become so busy giving our energy away that we forget how to keep any for ourselves. We say yes when we mean no. We overextend, over-explain, over-apologize. We lose sleep over texts left unread. We pour love into people who are too broken or too indifferent to hold it. And the whole time, we tell ourselves, this is what love looks like. But Schopenhauer, in his cold and honest clarity, offers us another view. He reminds us that no one is coming. No one owes you understanding. No one is required to hold your pain, to pick up your pieces, to validate your worth. And while that may sound cruel, it's actually freedom in disguise. Because the moment you stop waiting to be saved, you discover something far more powerful. You can save yourself. You start pulling back all the energy you gave away. You stop chasing people who only loved the convenient parts of you. You stop explaining your heart to those who never bothered to listen. And in that stillness, you meet someone you forgot. You meet yourself. Not the version of you who performs for love. Not the version who bends to be accepted. Not the version who feels small in the silence. The real you. The you who can be alone and not feel lonely. The you who can sit in quiet and feel peace instead of panic. The you who no longer ties their happiness to someone else's behavior. You begin to understand what Schopenhauer meant by emotional independence. He didn't mean becoming hard, cold, or closed. He meant becoming whole. Because when your emotional world depends on others, you are at their mercy. If they love you, you're happy. If they ignore you, you collapse. If they stay, you feel secure. If they leave, you feel abandoned. That's not love. That's emotional hostage taking. And the only way to escape it is to walk back to your own center, to stop orbiting, to stop chasing, to stop believing that your worth lies in being chosen. Your worth was never in their hands. It was never in their text replies. It was never in their ability to see you. It was always yours. But as long as you were waiting for them to reflect it back to you, you stayed blind to your own light. Now in this quiet turning inward, you see it. You see that peace doesn't come from being understood. It comes from understanding yourself. You see that love doesn't have to be loud to be real. Sometimes, it's quiet, gentle, internal. You see that solitude isn't emptiness. It's space. Space to breathe, to grow, to listen. You realize that being alone isn't what breaks you. What breaks you is believing you shouldn't be. Because you were conditioned to believe that wholeness comes from others. That happiness is in being needed. That purpose is in being praised. But none of that was true. The truth is this: when you turn inward, you come home. Not to a place, not to a person, but to the version of you who no longer waits for permission to be at peace. That version doesn't need to be loved to feel lovable, doesn't need to be followed to feel seen, doesn't need to be held to know they are whole. That version is you, without the illusion, you without the ache, you without the constant reaching. And once you arrive there, something sacred begins to grow. Stillness, stability, strength, the kind no one can give you, the kind no one can take away. And now, you are no longer waiting, you are walking, not behind anyone, not toward anyone, but beside yourself. And that, Schopenhauer would say, is where true freedom begins. There's a truth most of us feel but rarely accept. People will always choose themselves. Not always, not immediately, but eventually, when the pressure rises, when the silence grows heavy, when the effort becomes inconvenient, inconvenient, they will choose themselves. And the sooner you stop expecting anything different, the sooner you'll stop breaking every time they do. This isn't bitterness. This is clarity. It's not about losing faith in people. It's about seeing them for what they are, human. You see, we want to believe in the fairy tale version of relationships, where love means sacrifice, where loyalty means forever, where the people we love will always choose us the way we choose them. But that's not what life teaches. Life teaches that people, even good people, have limits. That when things get hard, messy, inconvenient, most won't lean in. They'll lean away, not because they're evil, but because they're wired to protect themselves first. It's instinct, survival. The same thing that keeps us alive also keeps us from showing up for others when it costs us too much. And that hurts, doesn't it? Because you've shown up bleeding for people who couldn't even bring a bandage. You've stayed awake for people who wouldn't lose a minute of sleep over you. You've been the safety net for people who vanished the second you needed one. And still, you try to understand them. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they're hurting too. Maybe if I just love them better, they'll come around. But love doesn't fix self-interest. It doesn't erase someone's limitations. It doesn't change the fact that when the moment of choice comes, people choose themselves. And the pain, it doesn't just come from their decision. It comes from your disbelief that they could ever make it. You thought your history mattered. You thought your loyalty counted. You thought the love you gave meant something. And maybe it did, but not enough for them to stay. Not enough for them to carry you back when you could no longer walk alone. And that's the moment you finally understand what Schopenhauer was trying to say all along. People aren't here to fulfill your emotional needs. They're not obligated to hold your hand when the road gets dark. They're not required to mirror the effort you gave them. They're not broken because they didn't choose you. They're just human. And so are you. Because if you're honest, you've chosen yourself too. You've walked away from people who needed you when you didn't have the energy. You've forgotten the ones who once carried you. You've closed doors that others stood behind. We all have. We are all the villain in someone else's story. And when you finally accept that, truly accept it, you stop carrying resentment. You stop waiting for them to change. You stop expecting them to come back with an apology. You stop spinning stories in your head about how it could have gone differently. You just see it. They chose themselves. And now, so will you. But here's where the real shift happens. When you stop expecting people to love you better, you start loving yourself differently. You stop giving your energy to people who've already left emotionally. You stop explaining your pain to those who can't feel it. You stop begging for closure from people who closed the door a long time ago. And in that silence, where you once felt abandoned, you now feel anchored. Because now, your peace no longer depends on anyone's presence. Your stability no longer relies on someone choosing you. Your joy no longer lives in someone else's hands. You've returned to your center, the one Schopenhauer called the solitary path of the wise. Not because you're bitter, not because you've closed your heart, but because you've finally stopped handing the key to your soul to people who don't know how to hold it. Now you choose yourself, not out of fear, not out of pride, but out of respect. Respect for your time, respect for your peace, respect for the truth that if people must choose, you will no longer beg to be picked. You will walk your own way. And those who truly see you, they will walk with you, not because they need you, not because you begged them, but because they chose to, just like you chose you. That's the quiet liberation Schopenhauer offered. Not a world without people, but a life without expectation. A heart that still loves, but no longer waits. What happens when you stop trying to be important in other people's lives? What happens when you stop needing to be the one they call, the one they lean on, the one they can't live without? At first, it feels like emptiness. You've spent your whole life measuring your worth by how useful you are to others, by how many people depend on you, by how often you're needed, chosen, praised. And when that all goes quiet, it feels like you've disappeared. But stay there. Stay in that silence a little longer, because underneath that emptiness is peace. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that gets a standing ovation, but a quiet, grounded peace. A stability that doesn't shake when people leave. A strength that doesn't crumble when they forget to call. A worth that doesn't drop when you're no longer center stage. This is what Schopenhauer meant by self-possession. The understanding that you are not here here to be the emotional scaffolding of everyone else's life, that your existence is not defined by how many people lean on you, that your value is not tied to how well you carry others. Because let's be honest, you've exhausted yourself trying to be everything for everyone. You've been the fixer, the helper, the emotional anchor. You've been the one who stays calm in chaos, the one who holds space when others fall apart, the one who gives without asking, waits without questioning, sacrifices without being seen. And a part of you believed that if you were needed enough, you'd be loved enough. But needing and loving are not the same thing. People may cling to you without cherishing you. They may rely on you without respecting you. They may benefit from your presence without ever offering their own in return. And when that realization hits, when you finally see that your usefulness has been mistaken for love, it shatters you, but only for a moment, because something more powerful grows in its place. The decision to no longer be needed, to simply be. You stop performing. You stop fixing. You stop proving. You begin to exist on your own terms. You realize that love given freely, without condition, without expectation, is the only kind that doesn't drain you. You start saying no, without guilt. You start taking space without apology. You start honoring your energy instead of spending it recklessly. And you notice something strange. The people who only stayed because they needed you, leave. The ones who fed off your availability, pull away. The ones who loved the version of you who sacrificed herself, begin to fade. But that's okay. Let them go. Because the ones who stay now, they're different. They see you. They don't need you to fix them. They don't love you because of what you do. They love you because of who you are, with no performance, no exhaustion, no transaction. That's the beauty of not needing to be needed. You attract people who meet you in truth, not in dependency, not in manipulation, not in obligation. And you finally learn how to breathe, because for the first time in your life, your peace doesn't depend on anyone else, not their approval, not their loyalty, not their presence. You are your own home, your own center, your own sanctuary. And that kind of stability, it's rare, it's powerful, it's unshakable. Schopenhauer called this inner freedom, the state where you are no longer a satellite revolving around others, but a sun, shining steadily in your own space. And here's the twist you never saw coming. When you stop needing others to choose you, they start choosing you anyway. Not because you begged, not because you proved, but because your peace becomes magnetic. Your self-possession becomes irresistible. Your calm becomes more powerful than any performance ever was. Because the one who doesn't chase invites curiosity. The one who doesn't beg inspires respect. The one who floats becomes unforgettable. So what's left when you stop needing? You remain. You, with your clarity. You, with your silence. You, with your strength. No longer waiting. No longer bending. No longer measuring your value by how needed you are. You are not here to carry others to their healing. You are here to return to yourself. To build a peace no one can take. To hold a love that doesn't beg. To live a life that doesn't orbit around anyone, not even the ones you miss. And in that life, in that stillness, you find the most powerful truth of all. You were always enough, even when no one needed you, especially then.